The first time my husband told me he wanted a divorce, he was smiling. Not the sad kind of smile people force when they're trying to soften bad news. Not the nervous smile of someone who feels guilty. It was the smile of a man who thought he had already won. I remember staring at him across our kitchen table while my coffee slowly went cold between my hands. We had been married for 12 years. 12 years of birthdays, holidays, sleepless nights, arguments, compromises, and promises. 12 years that apparently meant nothing to him anymore. "I think it's time we end this," he said casually, as if he were discussing the weather, as if he weren't tearing apart the life we'd built together. For a moment, I honestly thought he was joking. Then I noticed the folder beside him. A thick folder. Divorce papers. Already prepared. Already signed. Already waiting. My stomach dropped. "You're serious?" I asked. He leaned back in his chair and shrugged. "I've been serious for months. Months. Months." The word echoed through my head like a gunshot. While I had been planning vacations and buying anniversary gifts, my husband had apparently been planning an exit strategy. I felt sick. "What happened?" I whispered. His expression hardened. "This marriage stopped working a long time ago." That hurt. But what hurt more was what came next. "You've never contributed much anyway." I stared at him. "What?" "You heard me." His voice was cold now. Calculated. Cruel. "You don't make real money. You don't help with the important financial decisions." Honestly, I feel like I've carried this marriage by myself. For a second, I couldn't even process what I was hearing. Because it wasn't true. Not even close. But he said it with such confidence that anyone listening would have believed him. Including him. Especially him. The irony was almost funny. Almost. Because my husband thought he knew everything about our finances. He thought he knew exactly how much money we had. Exactly where it came from. Exactly who earned it. The truth was far different. But I didn't tell him that. Not then. I simply sat there and listened. He continued talking for nearly 20 minutes. Explaining why the divorce was necessary. Explaining why I would never survive on my own. Explaining why I should be grateful he was being reasonable. Every word felt like another knife. Not because I believed him, but because I was finally seeing who he really was. The man sitting across from me wasn't the person I married. Maybe he never had been. Maybe I had simply spent years ignoring the warning signs. The arrogance. The entitlement, the constant need to feel superior. When he finally finished speaking, he slid the papers toward me. "I suggest you don't fight this." I looked down at the documents, then back at him. "Why?" His smile returned. "Because he thought he had me cornered. Because lawyers are expensive." He folded his arms. "And let's be honest, you can't afford a long legal battle." I almost laughed. Almost. But I kept my face perfectly calm. The truth was sitting quietly in the back of my mind. A truth that could destroy every assumption he had about me. Yet I said nothing. Instead, I signed the acknowledgement of receipt. His eyebrows lifted. "You aren't even going to argue?" "No." His confidence grew immediately. I could practically see it. He thought my silence meant defeat. What it actually meant was patience. There is a dangerous kind of person in this world. Someone who becomes arrogant the moment they think they've won. My husband was one of those people. Over the next few weeks, he transformed into someone I barely recognized. He moved into a luxury apartment downtown, bought expensive watches, started posting photographs online, fancy restaurants, designer suits, weekend trips. The message was obvious. He wanted everyone to think he was thriving. Meanwhile, people looked at me with pity. Friends called to check on me. Family members worried. Some even asked how I was going to support myself after the divorce. I always gave the same answer. "I'll be fine." Nobody understood why I sounded so calm. Nobody understood why I never panicked. Because nobody knew my secret. Not yet. Including my husband. Especially my husband. One afternoon, a mutual friend accidentally revealed something interesting. My husband had been bragging about the divorce. Bragging. Apparently he was telling people he expected a massive settlement in his favor. That I'd eventually beg him for help. That I'd regret ever questioning him. When I heard that, I finally laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. The confidence. The arrogance. The complete lack of awareness. He genuinely believed he was the wealthy one in our relationship. He genuinely believed I depended on him. And that belief was about to become the biggest mistake of his life. A month later, the first major court hearing arrived. I still remember walking into the courthouse that morning. The air felt cold, heavy, like the building itself knew secrets nobody else did. My husband was already there. Expensive suit, perfect haircut, confident smile. He looked like a man preparing to celebrate. When he saw me, he smirked. Actually smirked. As if this entire situation were entertaining. As if 12 years of marriage ending was some kind of game. I took my seat and ignored him. Then I noticed something. His lawyer looked unusually confident too. That made sense. Because my husband had told him the same story he'd told everyone else. The story where he was successful. The story where I was dependent. The story where he controlled everything. The story that was about to collapse. The hearing began. Documents were exchanged. Arguments were presented. Numbers were discussed. And through it all, my husband kept smiling. Then something happened. The judge requested a complete financial disclosure. Every account, every asset, every investment, everything. My husband barely reacted, because he thought he already knew what those records would show. I, however, couldn't stop the tiny smile forming in the corner of my mouth. The judge noticed. My husband noticed too. His expression darkened. For the first time all morning, he looked confused. And as the financial documents were handed over for review, I realized something. The moment I'd been waiting for was finally approaching. Very soon, everyone in that courtroom was going to learn the truth, including my husband. And when they did, his entire world was about to change. The strange thing about arrogance is that it makes people blind. Not just blind to other people, blind to reality. My husband walked into that courtroom believing he knew exactly how the day would end. He believed the judge would look at the numbers, see him as the primary provider, and practically hand him the victory he thought he deserved. Every movement he made reflected that confidence. The way he sat, the way he smiled at his attorney, the way he occasionally glanced in my direction as if he were watching someone already defeated. I stayed quiet. The older I got, the more I learned that silence can be a weapon, especially when someone is busy underestimating you. The judge spent most of the morning reviewing documents, bank statements, tax records, property records, retirement accounts, investment portfolios, the usual process. Nothing dramatic, nothing exciting, just paperwork. Yet I could feel my husband's confidence growing with every passing minute, because from his perspective, everything looked normal. The problem was that he only knew about the accounts we shared. He only knew about the money connected directly to our marriage. He had no idea there was an entirely separate financial world existing outside of it. A world I had built long before he filed for divorce. A world he never bothered asking about. The hearing paused briefly for lunch. As people began leaving the courtroom, my husband approached me. That alone was unusual. Normally, he ignored me unless he had something unpleasant to say. Unfortunately, today was no exception. "You seem relaxed," he said. I looked up from my phone. "I am." His smirk returned. That smirk was becoming harder and harder to tolerate. "You probably shouldn't be." I almost laughed. Instead, I folded my hands calmly. "Why not?" His eyes narrowed. "Because reality is about to hit you." The confidence in his voice was unbelievable. As if the outcome had already been decided. As if the judge worked for him personally. "I'll keep that in mind," I replied. He chuckled. Actually chuckled. Then leaned closer. "You know what your biggest problem is?" I didn't answer. He clearly wasn't looking for one. "You always thought you were smarter than everyone else." I stared at him. The irony nearly killed me, because the man standing in front of me had spent 12 years completely misunderstanding who he was married to. 12 years. And somehow he thought I was the clueless one. Before I could respond, his attorney called him back. He walked away still smiling, still confident, still completely unaware of what was waiting for him. The afternoon session began shortly afterward. This was where things started becoming interesting. The judge requested additional documentation regarding assets acquired before the marriage. My husband's attorney immediately looked pleased. Mine didn't react. The judge continued reviewing paperwork. Several minutes passed. Then I noticed something. My husband stopped smiling. Just slightly, barely noticeable. But enough. Because the judge had paused on one particular document longer than the others. His attorney leaned over, whispered something. The judge nodded, then requested another file. This time my husband looked confused. Not worried, just confused. Like someone watching a movie that suddenly stopped making sense. More documents appeared. More pages. More signatures. More records. The judge continued reading. Silence filled the room. My husband's attorney was no longer smiling. That caught my attention immediately. Experienced attorneys usually hide their emotions well. This one wasn't. He looked concerned. Very concerned. Then he started flipping through papers faster. Searching. Cross-checking. Verifying. My husband noticed too. "What is it?" he whispered. The attorney didn't answer. Instead, he continued reading. That was the first moment I realized they were finally discovering the truth. And they didn't like what they were seeing. The judge adjusted his glasses. Reviewed another page. Then another. Then another. A long silence followed. The kind of silence that makes everyone uncomfortable. Finally, the judge looked up. "Mrs. Carter." I raised my head. "Yes, Your Honor? Can you confirm ownership of these business entities?" The courtroom suddenly felt very quiet. My husband frowned immediately. "Business entities? What business entities?" I already knew the answer, because he didn't know they existed. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge nodded. "And these records are accurate?" "They are." Across the room, my husband looked completely lost. He turned toward his attorney. The attorney wasn't looking at him anymore. He was staring at the paperwork, and the color had begun draining from his face. The judge continued. "For clarification, these companies were established prior to the marriage?" "Yes." "And remained solely under your ownership throughout the marriage?" "Correct." The confusion on my husband's face was becoming almost painful to watch. He looked like someone listening to a conversation in a language he didn't understand. Then the judge asked the question that changed everything. "These valuation reports indicate substantial growth over the last 7 years." I nodded. "That's correct." The judge reviewed another document. Then another. The silence stretched longer. My husband shifted uncomfortably. His attorney looked physically ill. And for the first time since filing for divorce, my husband appeared nervous. Then came the moment everything started collapsing. The judge set down the paperwork and looked directly at both legal teams. "I want to ensure there is no misunderstanding regarding these figures." My husband sat forward. His attorney closed his eyes briefly. And then the judge said words that completely changed the atmosphere inside the courtroom. "The valuation of Mrs. Carter's holdings currently exceeds $19 million. The room froze. Completely. Utterly. Frozen. My husband didn't react immediately, because his brain couldn't process what he'd just heard. 19 million. The number hung in the air like a bomb. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody even seemed to breathe. My husband blinked several times, then looked toward his attorney, waiting, hoping, praying, for someone to explain. Instead, his attorney slowly lowered the documents. And that's when I saw it. The realization. The exact moment reality finally caught up to him. The confidence vanished. The arrogance disappeared. The smirk died. And for the first time since this entire nightmare began, my husband looked afraid. For several seconds after the judge announced the valuation, nobody spoke. Not the attorneys. Not the judge. Not even my husband. The entire courtroom seemed trapped in a moment that nobody had expected. Especially him. $19 million. The number kept echoing through the room. My husband stared at me as if I had suddenly become a stranger. And in a way I had. Because the woman he thought he knew never existed. At least not the version he'd created in his head. For years he convinced himself he was the successful one. The provider. The financial genius. The person carrying the marriage. Meanwhile, he never once bothered to ask what I was doing during the countless hours I spent working. He never cared enough to understand it. And now that ignorance was sitting in front of him like a loaded gun. The judge continued reviewing documents while my husband sat frozen. His attorney leaned toward him and whispered something. I couldn't hear the words. I didn't need to. The panic on my husband's face told me everything. For the first time since filing for divorce, he wasn't thinking about winning. He was trying to understand how badly he had miscalculated. The hearing resumed. Questions were asked. Answers were given. And with every passing minute, the picture became clearer. Years earlier, before I met my husband, I had started a small software company with a college friend. Nothing glamorous. Nothing exciting. Two exhausted women working from a tiny apartment while surviving on instant noodles and optimism. Most people thought the company would fail. Some openly laughed at us. Others politely pretended to support us while secretly waiting for the collapse. We kept building anyway, year after year, client after client, contract after contract. The company grew slowly, then suddenly, then explosively. By the time I married my husband, the business was already generating serious revenue. Not enough to make headlines, not enough to buy private islands, but enough to secure a future. My attorneys had advised me to keep the business legally separate. Different accounts, different ownership structures, different legal protections. I followed that advice, not because I planned for divorce, because that's how responsible business owners operate. The result was simple. The company remained mine. Every share, every asset, every dollar, legally and completely mine. The judge explained this in careful detail. My husband looked like he was being physically injured by every sentence, because every explanation destroyed another assumption he'd spent years believing. Then things became even worse for him. The court-appointed financial expert began speaking. And unlike attorneys, financial experts don't care about feelings. They care about numbers. Cold, brutal numbers. The expert explained how the company had expanded nationally, how new contracts dramatically increased its value, how future projections suggested continued growth, and most importantly, how the current valuation might actually be conservative. That word seemed to hit my husband harder than the 19 million itself. Conservative, meaning the real value could be higher, much higher. I watched his face lose more color with every passing minute. The arrogance was completely gone now. In its place was pure disbelief. Then came the moment that almost made me laugh. Almost. My husband raised his hand and interrupted. Your Honor, there has to be some mistake. The courtroom turned toward him. The judge remained expressionless. What mistake are you referring to? My husband pointed toward the documents. Those numbers can't be right. The judge adjusted his glasses. Why not? My husband opened his mouth, then stopped, because he had no answer. Only assumptions. Years of assumptions. And assumptions don't hold much weight in court. The judge calmly explained that multiple independent evaluations had verified the figures. The records were legitimate. The ownership was legitimate. The valuation was legitimate. Everything was legitimate. There was no mistake. My husband slowly sat back down, defeated. For the first time, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered the kitchen, the smirk, the comments about me contributing nothing, the warnings that I couldn't survive without him. And the sympathy disappeared. The hearing ended shortly afterward. People began leaving. Attorneys gathered paperwork. Court staff moved on to the next case. Life continued, but my husband remained seated, staring, not at the judge, not at the attorneys, at me. I gathered my documents and prepared to leave. Then his voice stopped me. Claire. It was the first time he'd spoken my name without arrogance in months, maybe years. I turned around. He looked completely different, smaller somehow, not physically, emotionally, like someone who had just discovered the world wasn't built the way they thought. You never told me. I considered the question, then shook my head. No. His eyes narrowed. Why? I stared at him for several seconds. The answer seemed obvious. Because you never asked. Silence. Heavy silence. The kind that hurts. Because both people know the answer is true. He looked away first. That alone told me everything. Then he asked another question. One that surprised me. How long? How long what? How long has the company been worth that much? I thought about it. A while. His jaw tightened. A while. Several years. The realization visibly hit him. Several years. Meaning while he was bragging. While he was acting superior. While he was explaining finances to me like I was a child, I had quietly become wealthier than he ever imagined. The humiliation on his face was impossible to miss. Then something changed. His expression softened. just slightly, and suddenly I recognized the man I'd married. Not the arrogant stranger from recent months. The old version. The one buried underneath all the ego. I really thought. He started, then stopped. I waited. Eventually he laughed bitterly. I thought I was the successful one. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then I nodded. I know. The honesty of the answer seemed to hurt him more than any insult could have. Because deep down, he knew it was true. And standing there in that courthouse hallway, surrounded by strangers and lawyers and court officers, I realized the divorce was no longer the thing breaking him. The truth was, and the worst part, the biggest revelation still hadn't happened yet. Because later that afternoon, my attorney would discover something hidden in my husband's financial disclosures. Something he never expected anyone to find. Something that would change the entire divorce case overnight. The call from my attorney came less than 2 hours after we left the courthouse. At first, I thought she was calling to discuss the hearing, the valuation, the judge's reaction, my husband's complete collapse. Instead, the moment I answered, I heard something unusual in her voice. Excitement. The kind of excitement lawyers try very hard to hide. Claire, are you sitting down? My stomach tightened immediately. What happened? There was a brief pause. Then she laughed. Actually laughed. Your husband is an idiot. I blinked. What? Not just arrogant. Another pause. An actual idiot. Now she had my full attention. I sat down on the edge of my couch. Explain. My attorney took a deep breath. After today's hearing, I started reviewing his financial disclosures again. My heart began beating faster. Every divorce case involved mountains of paperwork. Most of it boring. Most of it routine. But occasionally, people made mistakes. Expensive mistakes. What did you find? For several seconds, she didn't answer. Then she said 4 words. He lied to court. The room went silent. I slowly stood back up. What kind of lie? A very big one. My attorney began explaining. Apparently, while preparing for trial, my husband had submitted sworn financial statements listing all assets under his ownership. Bank accounts, investments, property, everything. Or at least, everything he wanted the court to see. The problem was that someone had forgotten to hide a paper trail. And paper trails have a nasty habit of surviving. Especially in divorce cases. The more investigators searched, the more they found. And the more they found, the worse it became. By the time my attorney finished explaining, I was staring silently out my apartment window. Because my husband wasn't merely hiding money. He was hiding an entire second life. A life I knew nothing about. Over the following days, the truth emerged piece by piece. Like a puzzle nobody wanted to solve. 3 years earlier, while we were still married, my husband had secretly created multiple investment accounts. Accounts he never disclosed. Accounts he intentionally concealed. Accounts holding hundreds of thousands of dollars. Then investigators discovered additional transactions. Large transactions. Suspicious transactions. Money moving between accounts. Money disappearing. Money reappearing elsewhere. Every discovery raised new questions. Every answer created bigger problems. At first, I assumed greed was the explanation. Simple greed. But then my attorney uncovered something that made my blood run cold. A luxury apartment. Not the one he'd moved into after filing for divorce. Another apartment. One he'd been paying for quietly. For over 2 years. 2 years. I sat in silence after hearing that. 'Cause I already knew what it meant. People don't secretly maintain luxury apartments for 2 years without a reason. And unfortunately, I was right. The investigator called 3 days later. His tone was professional, detached, but even he sounded uncomfortable. We found evidence suggesting another relationship. I closed my eyes. There it was. The answer. The answer I already suspected. The answer I never wanted confirmed. Another woman. Again. After 12 years together. After everything. Another woman. The funny thing was, I didn't cry. I expected tears. Anger. Heartbreak. Something. Instead I felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. Maybe because the marriage had already ended months earlier. Maybe because the courtroom had changed everything. Or maybe because I was simply exhausted. Whatever the reason, the betrayal barely registered. The next hearing arrived sooner than expected. And this time the atmosphere felt completely different. My husband entered the courtroom looking exhausted. Gone was the expensive confidence. Gone was the arrogant smile. Gone was the man who thought he controlled the narrative. Instead, he looked worried. Very worried. His attorney looked even worse. When the hearing began, the judge immediately addressed the newly discovered financial discrepancies. The courtroom became painfully quiet. Nobody needed to explain how serious the situation was. Judges do not appreciate being lied to, especially under oath. One by one, the evidence was presented. Hidden accounts, undisclosed investments, missing disclosures, suspicious transfers. Every revelation chipped away at whatever credibility my husband still possessed. I watched him sink lower into his chair. His attorney attempted explanations, misunderstandings, oversights, clerical mistakes, the usual excuses. The judge wasn't impressed. Not even slightly. Then came the affair, the apartment, the payments, the timeline. The courtroom shifted instantly, because hidden money is bad. Hidden money connected to a secret relationship is worse. Much worse. For the first time, my husband looked genuinely terrified. And honestly, I think he finally understood the situation. Until that moment, he thought the divorce was about dividing assets. Now it was about consequences. Real consequences. The judge ordered additional investigations, additional disclosures, additional reviews. Then the hearing ended. But something unexpected happened afterward. As people began leaving, my husband approached me. Slowly, carefully, like someone approaching a wild animal. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he surprised me. "Claire." I turned. His eyes looked different. Tired. Defeated. Older.
I'm sorry.
The words caught me completely off guard. Not because I wanted them. Because I never expected them. Not from him. Not now. Not after everything. I stared at him, trying to decide whether I believed him, trying to decide whether it mattered. Eventually, I asked the only question that seemed important. "For what?" He laughed quietly.
A sad laugh.
The kind people make when they realize the answer is too big. Where should I start? Neither of us spoke. The silence stretched. Then he looked down. I spent years trying to feel important. His voice cracked slightly. And somewhere along the way, he stopped, swallowed hard, then finished. I forgot how lucky I was. The words hung between us. Painful, honest, late, very late. For a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the kitchen table, the smirk, the insults, the courtroom, the years of arrogance. And I realized something. Some apologies arrive after the damage is already done. Some lessons arrive after the opportunity to use them has passed. My husband had finally learned humility. The problem was that he learned it too late, because neither of us knew it yet. But the final hearing was about to reveal one last surprise. A surprise that would leave the entire courtroom speechless, including me. The final hearing arrived on a rainy Thursday morning. By then, almost 6 months had passed since my husband first slid those divorce papers across the kitchen table and smiled like he'd already won. 6 months. 6 months of investigations. 6 months of lawyers. 6 months of financial disclosures. 6 months of watching the man I married slowly realize he wasn't nearly as smart as he thought he was. When I arrived at the courthouse, I noticed something immediately. My husband looked exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. The confidence that once seemed impossible to shake was completely gone. The expensive suits were still there. The polished appearance remained. But underneath it all, he looked like a man carrying something heavy, something he couldn't put down. The hearing began shortly afterward. The judge reviewed the final reports, the hidden accounts, the undisclosed assets, the investigation findings, everything. At this point, the outcome wasn't really a mystery anymore. My husband's attempt to hide money had backfired spectacularly. His credibility had been destroyed, his financial position weakened, his reputation damaged, and everyone in the room knew it, including him. Then the judge began discussing asset division, property, investments, accounts, business holdings. Everything was addressed carefully, methodically, professionally, and as expected, my company remained entirely mine, protected, separate, untouchable. The judge confirmed it officially. My husband wouldn't receive a single share. Not $1 of ownership. Not one piece of equity. Nothing. Years earlier, he would have laughed at the idea. Now he simply stared at the table, defeated. Then something unexpected happened. The judge paused, reviewed one final document, and frowned. My attorney looked confused. His attorney looked confused. Even I looked confused, because nobody expected additional surprises. The case was essentially over. Yet the judge continued reading. Several seconds passed. Then he looked directly at my husband. "Mr. Carter." My husband slowly raised his head. "Yes, Your Honor?" The judge adjusted his glasses. "There appears to be another matter requiring clarification." The room became silent. My husband frowned. "So ordered." The judge continued. "This document indicates a trust established approximately 11 years ago." I blinked. "A trust?" My husband looked equally confused. "What trust?" The judge lifted the paperwork. "This trust." The entire courtroom froze, because apparently neither of us knew it existed. The judge reviewed additional pages. Then his expression softened slightly, and suddenly I realized this wasn't bad news. Not for either of us. It was something else entirely. The judge looked toward me. "Mrs. Carter, were you aware of this?" "No, Your Honor." He nodded, then turned toward my husband. "Were you?"
No.
Now everyone looked confused, including the attorneys. The judge spent another minute reviewing the paperwork before finally explaining. Years earlier, my late grandfather had established a private family trust. A trust designed to remain dormant until specific legal conditions were met. Apparently, one of those conditions involved inheritance disclosure during major life events. Events like divorce proceedings. I stared in disbelief, because my grandfather had died nearly 15 years earlier, and nobody had ever mentioned a trust. Not once. Not ever. The judge continued reading. The room remained completely silent. Then he announced the value. My attorney gasped. My husband's attorney nearly dropped his pen. And I genuinely thought I'd misheard the number, because the trust wasn't worth thousands, or even millions. It was worth considerably more than that. Far more. Enough that the $19 million company valuation suddenly seemed much less impressive. My heart pounded. I couldn't process what was happening. Neither could my husband. The entire courtroom sat frozen. Not because of the divorce anymore. Not because of the hidden money. Not because of the affair. Because somehow, completely unexpectedly, my financial position had become even stronger. Much stronger. The irony was unbelievable. The man who filed for divorce believing I depended on him had accidentally triggered the disclosure of wealth neither of us even knew existed. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then I looked toward my husband, and what I saw surprised me. He wasn't angry. He wasn't jealous. He wasn't bitter. He looked embarrassed, deeply embarrassed, like someone finally seeing themselves clearly for the first time. After the hearing ended, people slowly began leaving the courtroom. Attorneys gathered files. Court officers moved on to other cases. The chaos faded. Eventually, only a few people remained, including us. My husband approached me one final time. Not confidently, not arrogantly, carefully, almost nervously. We stood facing each other in silence. The same two people who had once planned an entire future together. The same two people now walking away from that future forever. Finally, he spoke. "You know what's funny?" I waited. He shook his head. "When I filed for divorce," a bitter smile appeared. "I genuinely thought I was the successful one." Neither of us laughed, because it wasn't funny. It was tragic. Years of assumptions. Years of ego. Years of never truly seeing the person standing beside him. Then he looked directly at me. And for the first time in a very long time, I saw honesty. Real honesty. The kind that doesn't arrive until someone has nothing left to gain. "I wasn't laughing because I hated you." His voice was quiet. "I was laughing because I thought I was better than you." The admission hit harder than I expected, because it explained everything. The comments, the arrogance, the insults, the superiority, everything. He swallowed hard. And I was wrong. I nodded slowly, not because I needed the apology, because I believed it. For once. Then he smiled sadly. "I hope you're happy." The words sounded genuine, not manipulative. Not strategic, genuine, and strangely enough, I hoped the same thing for him. Not because he deserved it, not because he earned it, because carrying resentment forever is exhausting. Eventually he walked away, and that was the last time I ever saw him. A few months later, I heard he'd moved to another state. Started over. New job. New life. No luxury apartment. No secret accounts. No fake image to maintain. Just a fresh start. As for me, I kept running my company. Kept growing. Kept building. But the most valuable thing I gained from the divorce wasn't money. It wasn't the company. It wasn't the trust. It wasn't any number written on a financial statement. It was perspective. Because the greatest mistake my husband ever made wasn't underestimating my net worth. It was underestimating me. And sometimes, that's a lesson people only learn after they've already lost everything. If you enjoyed the story, comment, "Never underestimate quiet people," and subscribe to Niver Tales for more unforgettable Reddit stories with shocking twists, emotional payoffs, and endings that stay with you long after the video ends.